right, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. The federal election winds are blowing strong, with Mark Carney being sworn in as Prime Minister tomorrow and expected to call an election soon afterwards. So an election readiness pod for you today, centered not around the Conservatives or Liberals, but rather the NDP. Jennifer Howard, National Campaign Director for the NDP, joins us. Proud prairie girl, Manitoba born and raised, Jennifer served as a cabinet minister in successful NDP governments in that province. She has served as chief of staff for Jagmeet Singh since 2018 and helmed the last two federal elections as campaign director. So there's nobody better placed to talk about where the NDP fortunes currently reside and how they intend to move forward during the writ. This is going to be a frank conversation. How is the party responding to declining poll numbers? There are leadership questions as Mr. Singh's own numbers are sagging. We'll talk about those challenges and also the opportunities for the NDP to shape the fight ahead in an election context unlike any other. Jennifer, welcome to the Herle Burly. Really appreciate you joining us today. Corey and I always say that the best political organizers come from the prairies, and so here you are.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be asked.
You are undoubtedly super busy today, these days, so I do appreciate you finding an hour to talk to us. Can I start just learning a little bit about you? You're from Manitoba, right? What part of Manitoba are you from?
I was born and grew up in Brandon, Manitoba, home of the Wheat Kings.
Yeah.
And I actually lived there till my late 20s, and then I moved to Winnipeg and lived there until about 9 years ago when we moved to Ottawa.
Right. So Brandon is conservative country, isn't it?
Indeed. I ran there. My first time I ran was 1997. I ran in Brandon, Souris, finished a proud fourth. Those were in the Reform Party days. So we had like the Conservatives and the Liberals and the Reform Party. But yeah, very conservative.
I finished fourth once in an election, Jennifer.
There you go.
And only because there were not 5 candidates.
I think I did finish like ahead of the Christian Heritage Party and the Rhinoceros Party. So there is that. But I always tell people, like, I would rather run in a campaign that nobody thinks you can win than one that nobody thinks you can lose.
Right. So how'd you get interested in politics?
I was interested from an early age, and probably have my mom and my grandmother to thank for that. My grandmother, like every election that came around, she would volunteer, usually for the Conservatives, sometimes for the Liberals, although she did tell me in her last election that she was alive for that she voted NDP. So I always feel like we get them at the end. And my mom was also very politically involved. She took me to my first NDP meeting. I think I'd just turned 15. It was a nomination race and they needed all the votes. So I was signed up and dispatched to go vote in it. Right.
And so NDP comes from the family, not more than a conscious adult choice or something like that.
Well, I mean, I chose to stay in it as an adult. I think, I had that time that many of us do, and I was about 18, 19, where I kind of for a while decided that I was too pure for electoral politics and I was going to go do other things. And then it was actually Brad Levine that brought me back. We were both involved in student activism, and he will tell the story about how we stayed up late one night and he convinced me that I should indeed regain my membership in the NDP and I should give electoral politics another chance. And the rest is history.
This just reaffirms my view that there's actually only 10 active New Democrats, and they all...
Maybe it may seem like that.
Yeah. And you ran, and you were elected, and you were a minister in the Selinger government.
Yeah, I I did a few different things. I did family services, I did labor, I was the house leader, first female government house leader in the province, and ended my time as finance minister. So I got a good tour of duty.
Right. Now, normally people like you who are cabinet ministers are terrible political organizers. Mm-hmm. So how did you make the transition from being the elected person to the backroom person?
Well, I actually started more as an organizer. I worked with Gary Dewar when he was premier and was his director of issues management. So that's kind of where I more came from. And then I think, decided that I wanted to try to get elected again. I was lucky enough to do that and lucky enough to be part of a government. So I feel like I've kind of been in both those worlds, which in some ways I think makes me better at my job, because I feel like I can better identify with people who are running as candidates. I know what that feels like. I know all of the kind of insecurity sometimes and worries that go along with that. But I also I've had a good look at how elections are won and lost. And I think sometimes candidates don't see that part of it. When I was a candidate, you kind of show up, someone sends you out, you talk to people who love you all day, and you come back and then you win. And you're like, well, I won because everybody loved me. And actually, you don't see all the other work that is happening to help get you elected.
Right. Okay, so this is going to be your third election with Jagmeet Singh. Mm-hmm. Third time's a charm?
I hope so. I mean, I think I don't know if politics was ever calmer, but I certainly feel like the last three elections, the last one was in the midst of a pandemic, and it was a very kind of challenging time in the country. And this time is in the midst of a trade war. So, I feel like they're all very volatile and anything can happen. And I think, we're going to see that in this election as well. It's going to be a volatile election. I think rarely you have an election like this where there's such a dominant issue. I don't know yet how that is actually going to play out in people's day-to-day lives. I do think people, still very much have the concerns they had before the trade war about the cost of rent and the cost of groceries and the cost of living and climate change and all the things that were worrying them. So, those things are still very present. I think it's going to be interesting to see, do those at some point compete with the thing we're all watching on TV 24 hours a day. I hope they do, because I think we have good solutions to those problems that people are going through.
Right. I want to do a little history before I get into the present day. Given the circumstance you're now in, was the supply and confidence agreement worth it?
Yes, I think it was worth it. And I don't actually think that the supply and confidence agreement, I don't think that is tied to where the polls have us right now. I don't think that's what's going on. And I think it was worth it for a few reasons. I mean, I think on the affecting people's lives for the better, it was worth it. I think we got a lot of people, dental care. We see the beginnings of pharmacare. We've got 3 provinces now with deals. I hope that means it's going to be harder to undo in the future if somebody tries to do that. But I also think...
Say hi to the Kelowna Accord on your way by.
Well, sure. But, these are signed deals that hopefully the provinces won't let a federal government wiggle out of. I think it's going to be pretty hard to pry people's dental cards out of their
I think
hands.
Dental is more secure than pharma.
I hope anyways, although, things can happen. But I also think for New Democrats federally, it was an opportunity to show that we can do things. And I think it is going to be an opportunity to talk to people about what you get with a New Democrat MP. I think one of the things we're always a little bit up against in federal elections is this notion that a vote for the NDP is a wasted vote. And I think what we're accomplished through the supply and confidence agreement gives us an argument that when we get elected, when we elect enough New Democrat MPs, we can affect change. We can make things happen. We ran on dental care. We ran on pharmacare. We ran on paid sick days, and we fought to get those things to happen. We used our power to make those things happen. So I think, that gives us a record to run on, which is very unusual for an opposition party.
But there was opportunity cost to it, right? I mean, I have been kind of a firm believer that it blurred the brands of both parties, both the Liberals and the NDP, in the minds of Canadians. And that secondly, it was time that you really couldn't credibly differentiate yourself from the government. I mean, even when Mr. Singh would try to criticize the government, people wouldn't take it seriously because he was supporting the government and seemed to be a bit of a partner of the government's. And as that government became more and more unpopular, were there not downsides to being that attached to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that has been a challenge of it. And some of that I think about, I sometimes get to talk to other progressive politicians, social democrats in European countries, where these kinds of arrangements and governing systems are more commonplace, and they don't struggle with the same thing, right? And it seemed to me like the way that the conversation about the agreement went was very, I don't know what the right word, like it was very binary. Either you're working with the government or you're opposed to the government. When in actual fact, in most governments, you're always sometimes doing a little bit of both. Even when it's a majority government, there are times when parliamentarians absolutely work together to accomplish things. And there are times when they oppose. And maybe there was a better way for us to navigate that. But I also think like it was a new and novel thing for Canadians to see. And maybe we're not yet there in our kind of political culture development that it's possible to say, yeah, we're going to work together to get this done, and we're going to disagree about this other thing. And you can do both of those things. I accept that has been a challenge for us. And I hope that kind of as we go forward as a country, we come to a place where it is possible. I mean, my hope for politics is that it is possible sometimes for people to work together to get big things done, and then also to go and disagree.
Right. If my 40 plus years as a public opinion researcher has taught me anything, it's this. Healthcare isn't just a system in Canada. It's fundamental to who we are. At our core, we're a people who have each other's back. We believe everyone deserves access to quality care precisely when and where they need it. But beliefs alone aren't enough. That's where innovation comes in. As Canadians, we're constantly seeking ways to improve healthcare, to create a system that makes healthcare more convenient while reinforcing the very values that define us. These last weeks, I've been talking about how our presenting sponsor, TELUS Health, a proudly Canadian company, has been innovating healthcare technology. A shining example is the TELUS Health MyCare platform. Built with some of the best technology available, it's been fully customized to meet the specific primary care needs of Canadians. So here's what I meant when I said convenient. We're all accessing so much more of our care virtually, right? MyCare puts the proverbial boots to sitting for hours at a walk-in clinic, finding parking, taking transit to your doctor's office, or having to waste time taking off work, running down test results, or getting prescriptions refilled. Without getting too deep into the technological weeds, it amounts to a comprehensive, primary, publicly funded healthcare right there in the palm of your hand or on your screen. You can have a video appointment with a family doctor at no cost. After the consultation, you can get prescriptions, labs, or referrals directly through the app. And if you choose, your prescription can even be delivered right to your door. And TELUS is building and integrating new features, including AI and machine learning tools to improve patient experience all the time. Your medical records are also securely stored while giving you 24/7 easy access to your medical history and test results. We can be rightly proud of our universal system and the steps many are taking to make it better and more accessible. I'll speak more about how TELUS Health MyCare is built on Canadian values next week. So, I don't want to say things behind your back that I don't say to you. So, I have to say this to you. I have to say that the decision, having done this supply and confidence agreement, the decision to not bring Trudeau down in the fall is a decision that Singh and the NDP will regret for a long time. You were at 20% in the polls. You were tied with the Liberals nationally, which means in English Canada, you were ahead. There was a credible prospect the Liberals would fall to third or fourth in the seat count. Why did you give the Liberals the chance to reinvent themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a great question and something, probably we'll think about and talk about for a while. I think, a couple of things. We did want to see something like pharmacare come full circle. We wanted to give it time to get some of those deals done. I think that is true. I think also, frankly, had we elected a supermajority of Pierre Poilievre, we would have also paid the price for that politically. Right. I also remember the lessons of the Kelowna Accord and pharmacare that was just about to happen until we voted against the government. And so I think, there's also that reality where things were in that time. Maybe we would have won more seats. Maybe we would have, done far, far better. But the cost of that may also have been a supermajority for Pierre Poilievre. And so,
almost certainly would have been at that point in time.
Yeah, so I think you have to weigh that out, and I think a lot of folks who are our supporters would have been pretty perplexed at why we would have walked away at that moment and made that prospect a reality.
Right.
So it's that is a bit of the challenge generally of where we find ourselves as New Democrats.
Okay, so let's flash forward to the present day. What is it about Trudeau's resignation and Trump's emergence that has NDP support dipping a few points?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a few things are happening. And I think one of the things, looking back in history, it isn't unusual that when there's a Liberal leadership race, a new Liberal leader, when, they've had so much of the public attention focused on them with a prorogued parliament with no visible opposition, I don't think it's unusual that things would go up. Right. I don't think it was possible for them to go much lower, so I'm not surprised by that.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Well, possibly. And I think, also, like if we look back in history at other Liberal races, like we went down when Stéphane Dion was the leader. We went down when Michael Ignatieff was the leader. So that isn't unusual. I do think, right now we're in a moment where we also have an issue that makes people more appreciative of the government, kind of like the pandemic was. When the issue is coming from outside, when it's not domestic, people appreciate the government a little bit more. And so I think we're also seeing the impact of that. I think our job in the next election is to undo some of that. And that's what we're, going to base our campaign around. It will be, I think, giving Mr. Carney more scrutiny than he's had through the leadership race. I think it will be talking very clearly about the differences between our approach and his approach. And I think it will also be, certainly talking about the threat of Donald Trump, but also speaking about that in a way that we're talking about the threat to the Canada that we all want to build. The threat of Donald Trump taking us over is an existential threat, but becoming more like the States in order to avoid that isn't the answer either. And I think we are hearing some of that drumbeat about, we have to lower corporate taxes and we have to do other things to placate Donald Trump and then he'll leave us alone. That's not the way forward that we're going to put out there. So, there are opportunities in this campaign. There are challenges for sure, big challenges, but I'm still optimistic that there's a good path for us.
Right. What do you think at the moment, knowing, I'm sure, very little of what that with people knowing very little, but just off the top of their heads, what do you think some of your voters find attractive about Carney?
I think he's new, and I think there's always a bit of an attraction. I think maybe especially in Canadian politics, maybe all politics. What do they say? People love you the most on your first day and your last day in politics, and I think that's probably true. So I think he's new. I do think, people like he does come with this kind of economic credentials. I mean, frankly, like he probably looks like what our idea of a prime minister is. So I think that is something that but I think mostly it's the newness. He's a new face. Maybe he brings something new to the game because he hasn't really laid out a lot of policy or a lot of things that people might find attractive. So I think that's mostly it, is the novelty of him.
So his CV is really what people know about him right now, right? And you wouldn't have predicted that NDP voters would be attracted to a central banker. In fact, I kind of think that absent this Trump circumstance, you would have been every bit as excited about running against somebody like Mark Carney as the Conservatives were. Yeah,
but I think when I look at his resume, the central banker is part of the story, but it's not all of the story. Actually, most of his career has been spent making a lot of money for very rich people and doing some things that I don't think Canadians would be that enthused about in order to make that money. So, that's the case we're going to prosecute partially in the campaign. Absolutely, there's some public service in there. The other thing is, like, when he casts forward about what he wants to do in the future, it's very classical liberal economics, right? The stuff he's talked about so far is laying off workers, shrinking the public service, cutting services to balance the budget, and giving, undoing the capital gains tax, which mostly helps very rich people. Those are pretty classic central banker kind of approaches. And I think, as we can talk about that more, as we can talk to people more about what that means for them, particularly going into a recession when times are going to be tough, I think folks will see that that approach is a wrong approach for them and their families. But that's our job in the campaign, right, is now to prosecute that case against him.
Is that making the argument that he and Poilievre are the same, or how are you going to differentiate your attacks on him and on Poilievre?
I don't think that we will say. I don't think people buy that. I don't buy that that they're the same. So I don't think people buy that. But there are similar approaches that they are both talking about.
I was tweaking back to my head to Ed Broadbent on the eve of the 1984 campaign, standing on Bay Street and calling John Turner and Brian Mulroney the Bobbsey twins of Bay Street.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Good old days.
Yeah.
We thought alliteration was something Pierre Poilievre invented, but there you go. Not so. I think they have similar approaches, and I think they're certainly more similar than Trudeau and Poilievre were. I think Carney very clearly wants to bring the Liberal Party back farther to the right, farther to a small C conservative approach, especially on fiscal matters. Many of the things they're saying about how they would approach the fiscal health of the country are very similar. They both want fewer public servants. They both want less spending on programs. They both want lower taxes for millionaires. Doesn't mean they're the same, but there are similarities in what they want to do.
Right. Okay. So, as you said, this is an election that seems to be about a single issue. And it seems to be about who's best to manage this situation with the United States. How does the NDP get into that conversation? Don't seem to be part of it right now. Even the Conservatives are struggling to find a way into it, but the NDP seem kind of absent from it right now.
I think we are going to have a ability to recast that question. And part of that, I think, is going to be saying pretty plainly who we're dealing with in Donald Trump. Does anybody think that anybody actually is going to sit down and negotiate with this guy and he's going to keep his word? Is this a situation to be managed? Or is this a situation that calls for someone who's going to get in there and fight for you, and we're going to endure it and get through it to the other side? I don't know that this is a situation that we can manage our way out of. I think it's something that we're going to have to fight our way out of. And some of that is going to be making sure that people who are vulnerable are protected in that fight as much as possible. I think it means that, there is going to be, and we've already seen it, an appetite for a brand of economic nationalism that is very on brand for us. The notion of not being overly reliant on another country, of making the things that we need here, of creating good jobs here, of using the power of government to invest in those things and make sure that we are promoting Canadian industries and workers. So, we do have to shift the question a bit. But I also think that most Canadians, looking at what's happening, I'm not sure they believe that anybody can sit down with Donald Trump and negotiate our way out of this chaos. That what we actually need is a way through it that protects us. And hopefully we can make the case that we're the ones to fight for you in that.
So I just want to read a few words from a woman named Francine Leclerc. She worked at our sponsor CN for 34 years before retiring back in 2015. Given that we just observed International Women's Day over the weekend, I thought her story is worth sharing. Francine worked in hard jobs as a brakeman, her term, then as a foreman, also her term, and eventually as an engineer in command up in the locomotive, piloting trains on CN's main lines. I was one of the first women, she says, of her first days in 1981. It really was a man's world at the time. Some of the old-timers snubbed their noses and tested me on hard switches, but I've always been very physically strong. She continues, I adored the independence. Sure, there were days when it was minus 30 and you're trudging through thigh-high snow to uncouple cars and perform train maneuvers. And the hours were tough, particularly as the mother of a child. That's the hardest part for women. Luckily, my partner is a railroader too, and understood what the job entails. Equality starts at home as much as it does on the job. So many people at CN have grandparents who work there. It's always nice hearing my grandfather did this or that. What I'd love to hear more of is granddaughters saying, my grandmother worked here too. Now, obviously, Francine is a pretty tough woman, but she also stood on the shoulders of an earlier generation, the wartime generation. World War II was what really forced open railway gates for women. They became railroaders, hired into positions unavailable to them until then. They acquired a taste for independence and accomplishment and did not look back. It hardly bears mentioning that the company and the rail industry are vastly better off as a result. CN would like to express its gratitude to Francine, her entire cohort, and the women of the previous generation. On International Women's Day, it bears thinking about those who came before. At the beginning of this conversation, you described it as a tariff war. Is that what you think it is, or do you think it is something more than that?
I think that's the expression of it right now. But I mean, I was in Poland shortly after the American election, meeting with other kind of social democratic political parties. And there was one person there from Germany. He was an academic, and I will not forget it. And he, his view of Donald Trump was we were seeing the emergence of authoritarianism in the United States. And I think that bears out with everything we've seen since then. Right. And he kind of asked the question, how are we seeing this happen? And yet we're also seeing like Joe Biden just invite him into the White House for a peaceful transition of power, like this is normal times. And I think we are all still struggling a bit, actually, with how to react to Trump. Like, is this a guy who's a little bit crazy, a little bit unpredictable? We don't really like him, but he's gonna follow all the rules? Or is this the emergence of something much darker? And I think it is the emergence of something much darker. I don't think he cares about the rules. I think he is doing everything that an authoritarian regime does to set itself up. And I think we have to be much more honest about that. What does that mean for us as a country that lives right next door to these guys? We are going to have to reach out to more friends and allies and try to insulate ourselves as much as possible. But, I think a tariff war is the current expression of this. But I think Donald Trump is actually much more serious designs than just tariffs.
Right. So do I. Which raises the stakes.
Absolutely.
Right. So the argument is we don't need somebody that you can see sitting down with Trump and negotiating with Trump, because that's a ridiculous notion and you can't do it. And frankly, Carney's kind of laid out a condition for negotiating with Trump, which may never appear, which is that he shows respect for Canada as a sovereign nation. But what you're saying is we need somebody that's going to remember the working class through this whole fight. And
who's going to protect you. Yeah.
Going to protect you. So why aren't they going to choose Poilievre for that? And I want to use that question as a way to get into the broader question of why the federal NDP, unlike the provincial NDP in the prairies, in the West, all through the West, is really losing its working class vote to the Conservatives. And I mean, this is something that, again, we talk about in the Curse of Politics a lot, the difference between the Prairie New Democrat and the National New Democrat, and how much more pragmatic, economy-focused, and centrist Prairie New Democrats are compared to the identity politics focus of the federal NDP, which seems over time to have been alienating a lot of traditional constituencies. So in this fight, are people going to turn to the NDP for protection, working class people, or are they going to turn to Poilievre for protection?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what we're seeing right now is people are viewing Pierre Poilievre as someone they think is more likely to sell them out to Donald Trump than fight to protect them from Donald Trump. And I think also, in some of the internal research that we've done, there's, the Conservatives have been very good at getting their message out, especially on digital means, to many people. But when we start to talk about the ties of the Conservatives to lobbyists and to millionaires, and Poilievre's frequent visits to mansions to raise money and visits to American healthcare entrepreneurs to raise money, people very quickly accept that for this guy, it is money that talks, and that is who he's going to serve. But, what a campaign does is give us the ability to put that message out in a much more forceful way. In a campaign, we all live under the same spending limit, and we all get to put our message out on a more or less equal footing. So I think, we are going to be able to put out a message that about Pierre Poilievre, about who he really serves, and it's not the working class, and his agenda, which is to cut the things that working class people need. And that's not a hard sell, in my experience, especially people who've lived under conservative governments. They know that's what conservatives do. And I think your other kind of, about the working class and identity politics, I don't actually accept that. I think you have to do both those things. And I come from a working class background. I'm the first in my family ever to go to university. I also have a strong identity as a lesbian and a person with a disability. And both those fights have been important to me within the party, right? There were times within the party, for sure, we were told, we're not going to talk about abortion and choice because we really got to talk about these other issues that are more important. Now, we're not going to talk about same-sex marriage because that's going to alienate these people over here. But what I have found in the NDP at its best is an opportunity to have pretty real conversations with people who may not understand my life, who may not understand my reality, but do at heart believe that I have the right to live my life freely and to enjoy all the prosperity of Canada that they do. And being part of a party that is a broader tent than most people give us credit for has meant that we can have those conversations. Now, I think that has gotten harder, particularly in a social media age where we don't listen to each other quite as well, where we're all kind of, it's a much more toxic soup. I do think we have to work harder as a party to talk to people about the real things that are happening in their lives and real solutions. I think that's what Prairie New Democrats do very well. We also talk about protecting the rights of people. And we talk about how we're going to lower your rent.
But not at the bleeding edge of those issues.
Well, but I don't know that the federal party is at the bleeding edge of those issues either, honestly. I think many of the things that we talk about, most Canadians agree with. When we do polling, it's never our policies that are the problem. It's never the things that we're talking about that Canadians say they disagree with. There are other challenges for us, for sure. But the stuff that we believe in and care about and our values, those are pretty mainstream Canadian values at this point.
So a seminal book for me was Thomas Frank's What's the Matter with Kansas? Are you familiar with this book?
I am not familiar with that one, but I'm going to write it down.
So this is about, this book's at least 15 years old now.
Okay.
And he set out to... He's a sociologist of the left, may even be a Marxist, and he set out to try to figure out why the people of Kansas, who it's a poor state and most people there are poor, vote reliably Republican. Mm-hmm. And his answer, and it opened my eyes a lot, was that culture trumps economics. Mm-hmm. And that people vote for the Republicans because they agree with them on religion and on guns and on social issues. And that's comfortable. They're their people. They trust them. And Democrats can't break through with the kind of message you're talking about because those voters don't identify with Democrats, right? I would hypothesize that is a problem in Timmins for the NDP.
Well, except Timmins has elected Charlie Angus over and over and over again, right?
But I
and
know he's not. But I know he's not running.
He's not running this time. He's run for 20 years.
Right.
But there's a great candidate there who I think is going to do quite well. And they vote for Charlie Angus even after Charlie was, threatened with excommunication because he voted for same-sex marriage very publicly. So I think if you can be credible with people because you are fighting for the things that matter to them, they're going to believe in you. And they're going to believe in you even when maybe they don't entirely understand or agree with every stand that you take. That has been my experience. I do think that something that I think all of us in the progressive side of things have to figure out a better way to navigate is, it's an awful lot of finger wagging that we do at people. And I think that does turn people off. I think instead of engaging in conversation where we maybe don't totally agree about everything and having some honest dialogue about that, we very quickly want to wag our finger at people and tell them why they're wrong and all the reasons. And I get why that turns people off. That would turn me off as well. So, that's something I think we have to be in the business of changing minds and winning people over. And that means talking to people you don't agree with and talking to them in a way that, maybe you convince them, not in a way that you turn them off forever.
Okay. So, is there room in this campaign, do you think, for other issues? I just spent 35 days chronicling the Ontario campaign, which the Ford government very skillfully constructed around the fight with the United States to be about that issue. To be honest, throughout the entire election, over 50% of the people told me that the most important issue was cost of living, not Trump.
Yeah.
Right? But the parties, the NDP and the Liberals, who tried to run on the other issues didn't find any traction. So where do you think the room is to talk about advancing the social safety net, for example, in the context of this election campaign?
So I noticed something, I think this morning, and I don't know who did it, but a new poll that was out that now shows something like, I don't remember, it's 40 or 60% of Canadians now are worried about their job in the context of Trump. 40. Yeah. And to me, that maybe that's not news, but to me that was new. Like I remember when all of this started, people were worried about Donald Trump, but they don't really think it was going to affect them personally. They were worried for the country. They were pissed off at the 51st state stuff, but they weren't really yet worried about their own job. I think as this becomes more real and we see people get laid off and people are more worried about their jobs, I think that does open up a conversation about things like employment insurance, how we're going to handle the cost of housing again. Are we still going to be able to build the housing that we need? How are we going to deal with the cost of everything going up? So I think there is that possibility about how we frame it. I don't think the objective here is not to talk about Trump and not to talk about the tariffs. I think the objective is to talk about it in a way that also allows us to talk about issues that are also important to people. I think that if you just don't talk about Trump and only try to talk about these other issues, you run the risk of people thinking that you're completely tuned out to reality. But if you talk about Trump and you talk about, this is Donald Trump, this is what he wants to do, we got to make sure our healthcare system never becomes Americanized. This is why we have to build it in these ways. I think that's a possibility. But we will see. My feeling is the more that people start to feel economically threatened by what's happening personally, that is going to open up the conversation on how we actually deal with it and how we keep people from losing their homes and everything that they cherish.
Great.
It has come to my attention that I, Gary, the AI-generated voice who shills for air quotes media, am not popular with our listeners on YouTube. Or should I say one listener goes by an alias of cutlery and soiled clothing. Well, suck it, Fork Laundry. This one's for you. Actually, Forky, it's a proposal for everybody and you're gonna like it. Advertise on air quotes pods and you can get my nauseating voice off the air. Because your message will be read by one of our influential and human hosts, David Herle, Kate Hammer, or Mike McDonald. Or just record any piece of creative in your ad agency's fancy production studio and send it to us. Either way, you'll be reaching Canada's most influential listeners at this crucial intersection of politics, and who knows what the fuck happens next. Trump, a new prime minister, new economic policy, a whole new world order. Baby! My data points are tingling! Curse of Politics, the Herle Burly, and Hotel Pacifico have the ears of cabinet ministers, elected officials, and the political class, leading journalists, the C-suite, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. Prime influence time. So let's do Forky a solid. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com to get rid of Gary and get your message to the decision makers.
So where do you think that message might resonate? Where do you hope to pick up seats?
Well, I think, we're still hopeful in some of the urban centers where we've got strong candidates and have had them running for a few years. I'm thinking of places like Edmonton Centre, where we have a candidate, it's a very popular school trustee, and she's been running there for, I think, 18 months now. Halifax, which has the least reported on by-election in the country happening right now, that someone has been running there. Lisa Roberts has been running there. So I think we're hopeful there. I think there's also some opportunities for us in cities like Saskatoon, where it is very much a blue-orange fight. The Liberals are not in it. We saw the Saskatchewan NDP do very well in this. I think they picked up all the seats but one in Saskatoon. And I think particularly now with the overlay of Trump, those conservative voters are going to be even more nervous about putting their ex beside Pierre Poilievre's party. So I think those are opportunities for us. I think some of these blue-orange races that were maybe harder before Trump are maybe not as hard now, because there's a motivating issue also for our voters. And I think that is going to be something that is going to help us in some of those seats.
Right. So you didn't mention Regina. I'm just curious.
I didn't mention Regina. I think Regina is also possible. Some of the redistribution there is tricky for us, honestly. I think you are aware of the way that they carve up Saskatchewan is like this pie where you've got urban and then a bunch of rural. So it makes the dynamics sometimes challenging for us.
Yeah, but it's why Andrew Scheer exists.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was hoping you could take out that guy that beat Ralph last.
Never know. I'm going to put it on the list and check in on it, David.
Right. What do you think is going to happen out in BC? The polls have been all over the map in BC. I've seen, the Liberals dead as a doornail, and now you see some polls that show them competitive. NDP votes been moving around a lot too. What do you think is going on in BC?
I think what we see in BC is our vote is holding strong. We have good incumbents there who are well liked and well known. I think we have been running this kind of blue-orange fight on the island that continues. I think that some of the recent developments is going to make those seats better for us to hold. So I think we're going to hold in BC. There may be one or two pickups, but I think basically we're going to kind of hold our own there. I'm optimistic about that. We are fortunate to have a really good relationship with the government in BC and be working well with them. So we've got the advantage of having lots of their help and expertise in how we fight that fight there.
Right. Has Quebec been completely abandoned?
Not at all. There is like a really interesting kind of cluster of ridings in downtown Montreal that we have been working on. And again, we've had candidates in some of those ridings for months. We have Craig Sauvé, who came so close in the by-election there in LaSalle, and he is running again, popular city councillor, so we're hopeful there. Nima Machouf, who's running against Stephen Guilbeault for the second time, and of course Alexandre. And, people stay hopeful about a seat like Papineau, where there's no longer an incumbent, so you never know. Papineau looks a lot like an NDP seat in many ways, so maybe this time we'll be able to bring that one home.
So there's two schools of thought from New Democrats I talked to. One of which is a very pragmatic one, which is Quebec is a very, very tough market for us, except for one or two elections that were looking these days more like aberrations than a new thing. And it is a waste of resources to put any significant time or money into that place in an election campaign. And the other point of view is that the NDP aren't a real party unless they're a party in Quebec, and that you have to keep driving that and forcing that and trying to make a breakthrough back in there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to run as a national party, you have to run everywhere, and you have to have a strong presence in Quebec, and you have to have people who understand the nature of Quebec and the politics there. The other thing I will say, I find, you talked about the volatility in British Columbia. I find Quebec voters some of the most volatile and changeable in the country, and honestly, some of the most open to us. They don't always know as much about us as other places in the country, but they're very open to New Democrats. They're very open to Jagmeet. They still have very fond memories of Jack. And so, I always think there is always it takes some momentum. It might take a little bit of luck, but I think there's good possibilities for us in Quebec always. I would never give up on any part of the country.
But should I expect to see a significant, say, ad buy in the province of Quebec?
There will be a significant ad buy there. I think we are going to, this time around, we're going to be much more targeted in digital advertising than we have in the past. I think that, there's a better, I haven't given up on television like some of my friends have, but I do think there's a better ability to target the voters are open to your message when you advertise digitally. So I think we're going to have a bigger digital presence everywhere. But yeah, there's a sizable portion of our ad buy going into Quebec. I would say commensurate with the population there.
Okay.
We have a unique ad firm that only works in Quebec doing those Quebec ads. So we're not just like translating English ads. We actually have a Quebec firm that are doing those ads for us. They're very good, the ads that I've seen. So I think we have a good approach there.
So, you mentioned your held ridings, and I really called the Ontario provincial election wrong. And I called it wrong because I underestimated the NDP's ability to defy a provincial-wide polling trend and hold on to their incumbent ridings. And it was pretty remarkable what the NDP did provincially to turn 18% of the vote into that many ridings. So I know, Colonel Sanders doesn't give us the whole recipe, doesn't give us the recipe for Kentucky Fried Chicken. But can you give us a couple of secret herbs and spices about what the NDP do in ridings like that allows them to hold them?
Sure. I think we have strong incumbents who work hard for their communities, and their communities know that. So that I would say there is that.
You mean exceptionally, like more than a liberal or a conservative would?
I don't know about more. I guess we all like to think that our party is the best at everything and does everything really well. But I do think when you're elected as a New Democrat, you by nature going to have to work a little bit harder, right? You have to work a little bit harder to keep the seat. And I think for lots of our incumbents, they also really are very connected to their communities. That's kind of where they come from. That's what they know well. And I think also
can you just explore that? Because that sounds like a secret herb right there. Are you talking about what kind of backgrounds do they come from generally that allows them to be connected to the community?
Many of them have been involved in different kinds of activist organizations in their community. Typically we've got, people who work for nonprofits, people who have been teachers or social workers or led organizations, people who've been union activists. And so they're also kind of natural organizers in some ways, but they tend to be connected to the community, known in the community. And so I think that's helpful. And I think we also do have a very good, solid ground game. We know how to find the votes, and we know how to get the votes out. And And our people
How
are
do you do
motivated to do that.
How do you do it? How do you do it?
It's not, I don't think it's
Do
secret.
you still have door knockers marking lists?
I think we probably have graduated to phones and tablets at this point. I probably would still take my paper list, but I'm old school that way.
Right.
But I don't think it's anything secret. Like, you go out, you do the work, you knock on the doors, you make the phone calls, you find the people who are open to voting for you, you try to figure out which arguments work for them, and then you make sure they go out to vote. That is the secret sauce there. But a lot of it is hard work. It's just hard work. It's relentless.
But it's not hard work by one person. Like, is there something about the nature of the party that you're still attracting more volunteers, for example? So when I got involved in politics, even in Saskatchewan, a Liberal campaign, of all things, every poll would have a poll captain, right? And layering up to regional directors within the riding, and there was this structure of every door getting knocked, every vote getting marked, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Nobody has the volunteers to do that anymore, at least in the ridings I know, right? A lot of the stuff is being contracted out now. To professionals. So when you talk about hard work, do you have more people doing it than the Liberals do?
I don't know if we have more people. We have a lot of people doing it. We still rely very much on volunteers. I think we've gotten a bit more sophisticated in having a better ability to know where our vote is and talking to those folks who are more efficient at it. But yeah, I think we still have a good volunteer base that is going out there, is knocking on doors, is talking to people. I also think people really are proud of their NDP MPs. Like, when you get somebody to vote New Democrat, they are voting based on a value there. They are voting for something that they believe in. And people feel a tremendous attachment to that, in my experience. People, sure, in some parts of the country, I think people maybe become New Democrats because they hope for a job in government someday. But mostly that isn't the reason. Mostly it is a belief in something greater, bigger than ourselves. That's pretty powerful fuel to get people motivated to go knock doors.
Right. Not that the NDP don't believe in patronage has been my experience in Saskatchewan, but...
Well, I'm still waiting for mine, brother, so I don't know where it is, but...
Okay. So Jagmeet Singh, you must believe in this guy. You started to work for him in 2018. That's 7 years ago. And you're here today, and you're going to go into your third election with him. If he's going to surprise us in this campaign, how and when?
Well, I think for one thing, he's a great campaigner, and he loves campaigning. He loves campaigning probably more than any politician I've ever worked with. I did not love campaigning. I will say that pretty frankly, but he loves it. He's good at it. He is more connected to humans than any politician that I have worked with. He has an ability to not understand where people are at and what they're going through, but communicate with them in a way that I think is unmatched by either Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney. And I think, what we sometimes lack is a platform on which to showcase that. And a campaign gives us that. It is often very difficult for us to break through in the day-to-day media, and we don't have all the money of the other parties to do advertising between elections. But in an election, we get more of that. So I think people will see him, what he has to offer, and I think they will be reminded of his compassion, but also his ability to fight for them. Like, my experience with Jagmeet is, he is not somebody who ever shies away from a fight in his entire life. And he's not going to shy away from this one either.
I had him on the podcast years ago. And like you have just described, I found him, first of all, a highly engaging person. I liked him almost immediately. And second of all, he was clearly an empathetic and compassionate person. Right? He has, in my view, had a difficult time persuading people that he'd be an effective governor, that he's beyond empathy and compassion, and is actually the kind of person that knows enough about things to make a difference. Do you think I'm right? And if I'm right, why is that the case?
Well, I think that is a little bit a problem of every New Democrat federal leader, because people have never seen one as a prime minister, so they don't perceive one as a prime minister. But I think that's also where some of the achievements in this past minority government and the one before, I know people want to forget that the pandemic ever happened, but through the pandemic was also a minority government. And things like CERB happened because of Jagmeet and the NDP pushing for them. I was in those rooms where those things
Trudeau
were
didn't want to do
negotiated.
CERB?
He didn't want to do it at that level. Like with the first conversations, we were talking hundreds of dollars for a very smaller subset of people than where we ended up. And it was only because we were in a minority.
So you ran Morneau out of town then?
I don't know about we ran. I mean, I don't know if we ran Morneau out of town. As a former finance minister, I felt his pain. But, I also think like we were instrumental in making sure that people had what they needed to get through that. And that was Jagmeet. And not a lot of that is visible. I get that. But I think that he can also, going forward, he can talk about the fight to win dental care. That wasn't just like we came up with the idea and the Liberals ran with it. That was like day by day by day fighting to get that happen. Our first meeting on getting dental care done, they told us it was going to take 7 years to happen. And we pushed it through in 18 months. And that is Jagmeet and folks like Don Davies and other people in the caucus making that happen. So I think we didn't do a very good job making that visible to people. A lot of that happened behind the scenes, and we're going to have to make that more visible. But I think this past few years has been very good for not only Jagmeet, but the rest of the caucus getting a taste for what it could be like to govern. The challenges of that, but also the tremendous rewards in actually passing something that you talk about and actually bringing it to fruition and actually delivering something for people, not just getting to talk about it.
So if I was just listening to this conversation, I would draw the impression that your ideal outcome is a Liberal minority. How are you going to orchestrate that?
My ideal outcome is an NDP government, David, with Prime Minister Jagmeet Singh. That's my ideal outcome. We can't orchestrate the outcome of elections, and I am for a moment maybe going to go off on the strategic.
Well, wait a second. I'm just going to introduce a small challenge.
Okay.
In the 2006 election, that Paul Martin, in the latter stages of the campaign, Paul Martin fell behind. The Liberals fell behind Harper. Jack Layton never stopped campaigning against Martin and the Liberals right to the end. Right? His objective was as many NDP seats as possible, in my view, and ambivalent completely about the outcome. Mm-hmm. I don't get the sense that you are ambivalent completely about the outcome.
No, I want the NDP to win. That's I'm not ambivalent. That's right. What I want to. No, that is what I want to have happen.
Well, I know that is fair enough, but that would be quite something. So, right. In the context of this actual real world in which we're in, should we be expecting an NDP campaign to be mostly focused against Carney and the Liberals because they're the incumbents, or mostly focused against Poilievre and the Conservatives because they're the people you dislike the most?
We're going to have to do both, is the honest truth, because we have different opponents in different ridings. Like I know this blows some people's minds, but I think we have probably the broadest coalition of any party. There are seats where it is us against the Conservatives, and the only one that's going to beat the Conservative in that seat is us. And there are seats where it is us against the Liberals, and no Conservative would ever win that seat. And so we are going to have to take on both those guys. And maybe that makes it more challenging for us in some respects, but we're going to have to take them both on. And I'm not ambivalent. I think the country is better off with as many New Democrats as possible. And I think that history bears that out. When you ask Canadians what they are most proud of in this country, those are things that New Democrats help to have happen. Liberals too, for sure. But Medicare, pensions, employment insurance, all those things don't happen without New Democrats in this country. And so, that's my preferred outcome. I don't think we can orchestrate that. I think people who, I expect in this campaign again, there will be lots of people trying to show graphs and charts about how if you vote this way in this election, in this riding, this thing will happen. And I think that almost as always fails. We got to go out there, put the best program we can forward, tell people why we're the better choice than the other guys, work like hell in some of those local races to win them. And I think we're going to elect more New Democrats.
So one of the tricky things when you're running a Liberal campaign and the NDP are a threat is that many of our voters do not like hearing us attack the NDP because they don't disagree with the NDP that much. They don't see the NDP as a great threat. They see sharing a lot of common values with the NDP. They just, for one reason or other, don't think they should govern, but they don't like us attacking them. Mm-hmm. If I was to hypothesize to you that in this circumstance, with the external threat that Trump represents, and the threat that progressives think Poilievre represents, that many of your voters may not like you taking Carney apart.
I think it is more in how it is done, right? I don't think we are not going to do it in the way that Poilievre is going to do it. But I do think it's fair game to point out, Mark Carney is in many ways unknown and untested. And I think it is fair game to point out the things that he has done in the past, the things that he has already said he will do in the future, and why that is the wrong direction for the country. That is what an election campaign is about. I don't think it has to be nasty and mean. I think it should be like truthful and fact-based. But pointing out what the choices are and why this choice is not the best choice and this other choice is, that is what and we're going to do that. We are going to do that. And I am not going to fall for the argument that in order to stop a very bad thing from happening, we have to have like a not as good thing happen. I don't think that is, I think that is the road to cynicism in politics, that you can never actually get what you want. You can just settle for the least bad option. That is why we have 50% of people show up to vote.
Cool. Just a minor thing that I'm interested in. How's your financial situation?
Personally, I'm doing all right.
Excellent. Good to hear. I
have to renegotiate my mortgage.
I could loan you 10, but I can't do much more than that. But
I do have my mortgages up, so I am glad the interest rate came down yesterday. But we're going to be fine. We are going to have all the money we need to run this campaign. It's a fully funded campaign.
That means you will spend the limit.
We will. I don't know that we will exactly get to the limit, but we're going to be very close to it. We're going to be on the legal side of the limit. Let's put it that way.
No in and out scheme for you.
No.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. So I want to end with this question. And boy, I'm appreciative of this conversation. It's really been fun. So sometime in the next week or so, Jagmeet's going to stand up and kick off the NDP campaign. What are the things I'm going to remember from what he says?
I think you're going to remember a vision of the Canada we're fighting for. A vision of the country that we can yet build. I think you're going to hear about, for sure, that people have not been served in many ways by the system as it is. And we do need changes to make it better for people. But we can yet build the country of our dreams. That is still a possibility. I think you're going to hear a lot of hopefulness and optimism grounded in the reality of the challenging place that we're in. But, not giving up on Canada, not declaring it broken and beyond repair, but declaring that we can come together and fix the problems we have and build a better country for all of us. Right.
Sorry, I said that was the last question, but it really made me think of something else that isn't specific to the NDP. It's about all the parties, which is, it feels to me, I'm not an economist, but it feels to me that the truth of this matter is that if we stand up for ourselves and we fight the Americans, and there's an extended period of trade war between us, etc., and we are spending more money on defense and a bunch of other things, that this will have negative effects on the Canadian standard of living and that Canadians will be poorer than they have been for at least a period of time as we go through this. I don't think any of the leaders is going to say that to Canadians in this election campaign. Now, how do you feel about that?
I think that what the outcome you're describing will depend on the choices the governments make. I don't think that has to be the outcome. Governments have a tremendous amount of power. And I think this is one thing that New Democrats believe in. Governments have a tremendous amount of power, and this is the moment to use that power. There's a tremendous, to borrow a phrase, we have a lot of fiscal firepower. And if we use it in the right way in what is coming, I think we can emerge stronger. We can emerge. Does that not mean that it's going to cost a little bit more to go and buy a stove or an oven or a water heater? Yes, it probably will cost a little bit more to do that. Does that not mean that some of us who have a lot might have to give a little bit more to make sure that those of us who don't have enough have what they need? Yeah, that probably means that.
I told you I only had 10. I can only do 10.
Right.
Yeah.
But we
Keep
can
going,
emerge.
sir.
We can emerge strong. I believe that
We can emerge stronger, but we're going to walk through the valley of death.
It's going to be a challenge, but that is when governments should be their most active, I think. That is the moment for governments to stand up and to get involved and to help people out. And I think we have seen that at some points in our history, right? We came through, this is not, I'm not for a moment compare this to actual wartime, but this country has been through wars. People have sacrificed a lot, but governments spent a lot of money in those times to keep the country going.
Yeah.
And out of those wars came pretty significant social programs to keep everybody healthy and having what they need. And so, I think if governments choose to use their power to help everyone, we can come through this time. I believe that.
Thank you for that encouraging note on which to end. And I want to wish you the very best. You've got so much on your plate over the next week or so, a lot of I's to dot and T's to cross. Candidates, I'm sure you're still looking for, probably still honing advertising. There's a lot to do. And thank you for doing it for Canada.
Thank you. Well,
and
thank
Godspeed to you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the time that you've given me today.
Great. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, all of you Herle Burly-ites who watched or listened to this show, and Jennifer Howard, who gave up an hour she doesn't have to do this show. So thank you all, and we'll see you next week.
Herle Burly, Herle Burly, Herle Burly.